YouTubers, thrill seekers, small gerbils, and people named Bob. Greetings and hello. It is I, your favorite obscure social studies teacher, who's just conservative enough to be considered on the FBI surveillance list, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, folks. You know I always appreciate it. I appreciate the support, the input, and the encouragement many of you provide, and I'm happy to announce that the podcast has officially surpassed over 12,000 downloads. You know, that first 10,000 seemed to take forever. But 12,000 downloads here at Professor Liberty. We're going to be proud of that accomplishment. You know, we're about the same age as Uncle Joe's presidency. I think our first episode was February 2021. And, you know, this is the 110th episode in the span of 3.5 years. So I would say 12,000 downloads is a respectable milestone. And as I've said before, I'm mostly just proud of the type of people Professor Liberty seems to attract. Sure, we have the trolls. We have the miserable Morlocks living in their mom's basement. All they want to do is spread their misery of socialism and progressive atheism and all that fun stuff. But, you know, I'm still just shocked with how engaging and thoughtful people are that follow Professor Liberty, especially on the social media page. Mostly conservative, mostly patriotic, but always very intelligent, thoughtful people. And I've learned a lot from the comments and ideas that you guys have sent to me or posted on the social media. And if you'd like to keep enlightening your favorite obscure social studies teacher, send your stuff to ProfessorLiberty1776@gmail.com. That's ProfessorLiberty1776@gmail.com. Please send me your questions, your comments, your criticisms, your concerns, your quandaries, your paradoxes, your problems, your puzzles, whatever. Just send it to ProfessorLiberty1776@gmail.com. Alrighty then, boys and girls. Today's episode, like I said earlier, the 110th episode of the podcast. We're going to continue our series on important battles in world history. And today's episode is the Battle at Trafalgar. So far we've discussed the battles of Shiloh, the Battle of Midway, and the Battle of Thermopylae. As you can see, we're not going in any particular kind of order here, but we are discussing, or at least attempting to discuss, battles of consequence. Now, I was told that the Battle of Shiloh wasn't that consequential. Obviously, I disagree for reasons I laid out in the episode. You can go back and listen. But it's okay to disagree. That doesn't mean you're wrong or I'm wrong. Opinions are like, well, you know the saying. An argument can be made that some battles are more consequential than others, of course. However, we could also say that all battles have significance and influence to some degree or another. However, the battle we are going to talk about today, the Battle of Trafalgar or the Battle at Trafalgar, this was a consequential battle that influenced world history for decades, if not centuries, to come. The battle at Trafalgar was a colossal clash on the high seas. It stands as a defining moment not only in British, but European history as well. And its impact can be felt by some historians' account, at least for the next 100 to 200 years afterwards. The Battle at Trafalgar was fought on October 21st, 1805, and it was off the coast of Spain near Cape Trafalgar, which is very close to the Strait of Gibraltar. It pitted the formidable British Royal Navy under Horatio Nelson against a combined Allied fleet of the French and the Spanish. The battle arose from a larger conflict known as the Napoleonic Wars, and this went on from about 1803 to 1815. Obviously, the Napoleonic Wars gets their name from Napoleon Bonaparte, the ambitious and brilliant French emperor. And he sought, like all European ambitious emperors, the domination of Europe. British naval superiority was a thorn in his side, and it hindered his plans to invade Britain. To counter this, Napoleon ordered the French and Spanish fleets to break out of their ports and establish control of the English Channel. So let's discuss the English Channel for a minute. You know, in class, I often bring up how geography has played crucial roles in the rise and fall of nations throughout history. I often quib in class, I'll make a joke to the kids, the geographic gods blessed some nations and cursed others. Geography, in my humble opinion, is one of the major reasons for Rome's success, as well as why Italy was not only, central to the Roman Empire, but also home of the Renaissance. It all has to do with geographic locations. Or take Egypt, for example. The deserts in the east and the west of the Nile River helped Egypt progress and grow because they had isolation. They had two walls of desert, if you will, which nobody is going to try to cross to invade. And then obviously the Nile itself, the reason, it flooded consistently every year. This is going to help with famine, or, it's going to help protect against famine, and they're going to have plenty of food surpluses. Again, this is going to allow them to grow in culture and advance their civilization. We can go on and on about how geography has helped nations become empires and even world powers. And the main geographic blessing of the British nation was the English Channel. Also known as the English Sea, the Channel divides southern England from northern France. It's about 217 miles long, and it varies in width from 21 miles to about 112 miles. This channel has served as a natural barrier against invasion for centuries. Julius Caesar attempted to conquer Spain at least 2 times in the 40s and 50s BC. You might also remember the horrible demise of the Spanish Armada in 1588, which started the decline of the Spanish Empire, while simultaneously bolstering England. And why did the Spanish attempt to invade England by sea? Because of the English Channel. Water, bodies of water, rivers, canals, channels, straits, oceans, seas, whatever you want to call it, these act as natural barriers or obstacles for invaders to overcome. Remember, we did an episode on the Battle of Britain in World War II. That's another example of how the English Channel saved Great Britain from the Nazi blitzkrieg. France, Poland, and the Netherlands weren't so lucky, were they? Why? Because they didn't have an English Channel. They shared land borders with Germany. So this sets the table for the battle at Trafalgar in 1805. As I mentioned earlier, the battle is part of the larger Napoleonic Wars. In 1803, the Treaty of Amiens broke down. This treaty was signed in March of 1802, and it provided an 18-month rest in hostilities between the warring nations of France, Britain, Spain, and the Netherlands. Now, Britain was the one to break the terms of the treaty because she was unhappy with how Napoleon was restructuring Western Europe. But the break in the treaty surprised Napoleon, which probably gave the British Navy the upper hand in this battle. But now, as hostilities are going to ramp back up, England or Great Britain is going to decide to play the defensive game, which makes sense because for the geography reasons we mentioned earlier. Spain allied with France because British Navy ships destroyed some Spanish vessels in October of that same year. So Spain's alliance gave Napoleon the ships he needed for an invasion of the British Isles. There's one problem, though, with this whole Napoleonic plan, and that problem is named Horatio Nelson. So let's talk about him. Horatio Nelson was born September 29th, 1758, in Norfolk, England, to an upper-middle-class family. He became a sailor on his uncle's ship at the tender age of 12. And according to BBC.UK, he became a captain at 20 and saw service in the West Indies, the Baltic, and Canada. Nelson made a name for himself for his immense courage, his bold action, and use of unorthodox naval tactics. And all of those things are going to come into play at the Battle of Trafalgar. He was also known for his disregard of orders given by his superior officers. One example of this was the battle at Copenhagen in 1801. Nelson was vice admiral, second in command to the more conservative admiral Sir Hyde Parker. The story goes that as the battle was taking its toll on both sides, Admiral Parker signaled to retreat. Nelson, being blind in one eye, raised his telescope to that eye, the blind one, and remarked of not being able to see the signal. And he continued fighting, pressing the attack until the Danish surrendered. 3 years before that, at the Battle of the Nile in 1798, Nelson successfully destroyed Napoleon's fleet and thus his bid for a direct route to India. Clearly, we can see that Nelson was a thorn in Napoleon's side, at least in regards to any naval ambitions he might have had. But no one can say Nelson didn't pay for his victories. As we just mentioned, Nelson sustained some kind of eye injury early in his naval career. He also lost most of his right arm off the Spanish-controlled island of Santa Cruz in 1797. We can almost say the guy gave his arm and a leg to the Royal Navy and Great Britain. His greatest victory, however, is going to be the one that would cost him his life, and that is the battle at Trafalgar. Under French Admiral, and I'm going to get this wrong for my international friends, but I'm just going to say Villeneuve. Under French Admiral Villeneuve's command, the combined French and Spanish fleet consisted of 33 ships of the line. Initially, Napoleon planned Villeneuve to sail to the English Channel to support an invasion of Britain. However, the involvement of Austria and Russia in that same year led Napoleon to abandon this plan and redirect his troops to Germany. Villeneuve was hesitant to engage the British, and this prompted Napoleon to dispatch Vice Admiral Francois Rosalie to Caldes to replace Villeneuve and send his troops to the southern port city of Toulon. You guys like that? Did that sound French? Toulon. Anticipating his replacement, Villeneuve chose to set sail with the fleet before Rosalie's arrival. And on October 20th, 1805, British frigates on patrol spotted the fleet leaving the harbor. And Nelson is going to be informed of these movements. At 4 a.m. on October 21st, Nelson directs his flagship, the HMS Victory, to pivot towards the advancing enemy fleet and signal his squadron to prepare for battle. He briefly retires below deck to finalize his will, and then returns to the quarterdeck for an inspection. Despite being outnumbered 27 ships to Villeneuve's 33, Nelson remained resolute, asserting that he would not settle for fewer than 20 captured ships. Nelson had already formulated his great strategic plan beforehand, which he conveyed verbally to his captains and also left in writing. The response to his plan was unanimously enthusiastic. Some are said to have had tears in their eyes. I don't know why. Despite anticipating traditional tactics from the enemy, the admiral opted for a new approach based on his extensive experience, and it was dubbed the Nelson Touch. Later, naval strategists would call this crossing the T. This tactic is aimed for decisive victory. Nelson, known for his innovative thinking, contrasted with Villeneuve's conservatism, believed that he had a pivotal moment in the conflict between French and English forces, and he understood the war's fate rested in his hand. When the fleets spotted each other, Nelson arranged his fleet into two columns, heading straight for the Spanish-French fleet at a right angle. This was a bold head-on tactic that left the bows of the leading ships vulnerable to enemy broadsides. What's a broadside? I'm glad you asked. Think about it like this. Even in the land battles during the Napoleonic Wars, men had to line up shoulder to shoulder in these columns, and then the enemy would be across the field parallel, and they would shoot volleys at each other, right? Well, 19th century ships do battle in the same way. Columns of ships would shoot parallel with each other. Remember, movable gun turrets didn't exist at this time, so ships had to shoot side by side. This is known as broadside. So why did Nelson decide to do this? Why sail straight into the enemy's vast column of ships ready to give you a full broadside? Well, there's a couple reasons. First, and in no particular order, by sailing directly into a broadside, you make your target area of your own ship quite smaller. In other words, it's easier to hit a ship side by side than it is to hit a ship heading right for you. Second, just take the charge on land, right? So go back to land when they charge, right? Slamming straight into the enemy's line, you now have divided his forces, punching a hole straight through his front line. Remember, the Nazis tried to do this at the Battle of the Bulge. That's what the Bulge was. It was the Allied line bending, but not breaking. Third, by breaking through their line, you're basically taking out the ships on the periphery of the battle, especially the lead ships. We have to remember, these aren't steam-powered ships or anything like that. They're old-fashioned sailing ships. And by the time the lead ships could maneuver to get back into the fight, the battle was probably over, which is what happened in this case. As the signal was given to prepare for battle, Nelson came back on deck with his familiar frock coat, wearing 4 badges of honorary orders on his left breast. Although his subordinates warned him that his regal apparel might make him a particular target for enemy sharpshooters, Nelson believed that one of his chief functions during battle was to appear oblivious to the dangers involved, thereby inspiring his men to equal bravery. Apparently, Nelson's otherwise staunch bravery was bolstered by the fact that he believed he was going to die. Nelson was going to die in battle with a long-standing premonition of death, having been told by a fortune teller that she could not see anything about his life beyond the year 1805. Another brilliant stroke of Admiral Nelson was his orders to the officers under him to use their best judgment once the planned chaos was in full swing. One source I read said that Nelson had full confidence in the naval superiority of English seamen over their French and Spanish counterparts. As victory moved forward, enemy fire peppered the British flagship. Shots ripped through the Victory's sails, shredding bits of canvas and scattered across the quarterdeck. The initial British ship to engage suffered the brunt of the casualties. We already talked about that. And they found themselves encircled by the enemy. Yet as more British vessels entered the newly formed openings created by the charge, if we will, the French and Spanish began to collapse. Admiral Nelson's confidence in his own men proved to be well-founded, as the gunnery skills of the British far outweighed or far outpaced the coordinated firepower of the French and Spanish. The carnage and destruction suffered by the HMS Victory and her companion ships, who served as the spearhead to the assault, was immense. Nelson's personal secretary was cut in half by a cannonball. The poor lad who was to take his duties was killed right before he could even start. The Victory's wheel was completely smashed, which caused steering to be almost impossible. The mayhem and destruction was so terrible that neither side could board the other's ships. Unfortunately, Nelson's premonitions of his demise were true. He would be struck by a French sharpshooter. The bullet would lodge in his back, rendering him paralyzed from the chest down. He knew the extent of his injury, and once below deck, he waved off his ship's surgeon, stating, "There's nothing you can do for me. My back is shot through." Nelson didn't die quickly, however. It took several hours. One officer later told him that 14 or 15 enemy ships had apparently already surrendered, to which Nelson quipped, "I bargained for 20." After 5 hours of battle, the fighting concluded. The outcome saw 17 French and Spanish ships captured, one vessel sunk, resulting in approximately 7,000 casualties. 15 French and Spanish ships managed to escape. Nelson's daring strategy at Trafalgar, though risky, proved highly successful. The British inflicted a crushing defeat on Franco-Spanish fleet, securing British naval supremacy for decades to come and crushing any attempts by the French to invade England. Trafalgar became a case study in naval tactics. It was innovative and it was bold. However, the victory came at high costs, including Nelson's own life, and this serves as a reminder of the human cost of such victories. After the battle, Nelson's body was preserved in brandy, and he was brought back to Great Britain for a hero's welcome and burial. To this day, you can go to central London into Trafalgar Square, which commemorates the significant naval victory. And speaking of the victory, Nelson's flagship, it is preserved as a museum ship in Portsmouth, England. Well, there you have it, folks. The battle at Trafalgar, a consequential battle that changed the course of not only British history, but European history as well. I'd like to thank BBC.UK, Britannica.com, Warfare History Network, and I even used Wikipedia, but only the cited sources. Thank you for helping me develop this episode. If you'd like to get more from Professor Liberty, please go to my teacherspayteachers.com website for activities, worksheets, lessons that you can use in your homeschool, in your classroom, to give to your communist cousin, whatever. Also, follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.